Good morning and welcome again to the Veterans Forum. I'm Bob Stevens, and I'd be happy to have been the host and privileged to interview some of these guys and gals who, as we said way back when, made the history rather than have someone else talk about it. Each one has been a little better insight into what really happened by the people who made it happen. And we're asking any one of you, guys and gals, if you have a story to share, we'd more than welcome you and hope that we can do a good job with you. Today is the 5th of April, 2010. The clock keeps ticking like mad. Our guest today is a young fellow named Herbert Mandel. I will say no more. I'll let him introduce himself, tell you who he is, where he came from, and so on, and then we'll take the show up. Young man, you're on, if you will. Tell us your name, spell your last name, dates of service, and rank at time of, what's the word? I don't know.
Well, I'm Herbert Mandel. I was born June 14, 1917, Flag Day in Brooklyn, New York. I look forward to being 93 in a month or two. At the age of about 12 or 13, I had a relative in Minneapolis, my mother's hometown, where I spent every summer, who had been in World War I. Most of my cousins had been in the Army, and I used to play with their knapsacks and Army gear as a kid. This fellow was in the Navy, and he gave me his Blue Jackets manual. And since I became a Boy Scout, I could do semaphore, Morse code, and I just devoured that Blue Jackets manual because it was on my bookshelf right next to my Boy Scout handbook. And I think that's where I got the idea of the Navy and the Naval Academy. So when I was moving along in high school, James Madison High School, I started knocking on doors and wrote away for the regulations governing admission. And my mother, who was not enthusiastic, saw that my father said, this is what he wants, and I'm going to help him. And during my senior year in high school, I was fortunate enough to get an appointment as a second alternate in my congressional district, which enabled me to take the entrance examinations. The Academy did not accept college boards or New York State regents. You must take their exams. And if you took them as an alternate and you passed, you did not have to retake the exam. And there were 4 of us in the district were able to take the exam. Of the 4, I was the only one who passed, and I got a 2.5, barely passed.
Just didn't know.
And so there I was, graduating high school, June 29th, 1934. A telegram to report into the Naval Academy for the final physical exam on July 9th, which I passed. And I was in, along with 100 who came in from the enlisted ranks of the Navy, who were sent to the Naval Academy prep class in Bainbridge, Maryland, and 25 who came in from the enlisted ranks of the Naval Reserve, plus some presidential appointments to the sons of people who were killed in World War I. And in my class filling out the class of 636, I think. The rest of them were all men who'd been to college for a year or two. And I asked them what they were doing there. And after getting to know them, they all came up with the same answer. The money ran out. And I see history repeating itself today in 2010. So that was the beginning of a grand, and looking back on it, a wonderful career with great people and visited wonderful places.
Good. Now, you said when we started that you were not going to dwell too long on the academy, but do you have any good memories that you'd like to share with us to kind of set the stage to how you developed and became the man you are today?
Well, my first year, I received a scare. I had won in a course called the History of Naval Warfare, I believe it was. And that gave me a false sense, because I had no preparation for the engineering curriculum, which I would have had I had the foresight to go to a technical high school. But I ran into trouble in descriptive geometry, along with a classmate and neighbor, Cornelius Patrick Callahan, Jr. from Butte, Montana, also struggling. Since we had good conduct records, when we appeared before the review board, we were each given a chance at re-exams, which Pat and I both passed. But after that, I was on my guard, because the engineering curriculum was coming fast and furious. And the class lost about 60 to 70 people that first year.
Wow.
And about the second, the same number the second year. And we graduated at the end of 4 years with 396 being commissioned.
Out of the 600 that started, huh?
That's correct.
Wow. Now, is that an average wipeout, or is that just a fluke? Or don't you really know?
Well, I don't think so. I think that the classes in the 30s, there were budgetary problems.
Okay, that's what you meant when the money ran out. The fellows just couldn't afford to go to school, and this was a way of getting an education?
I mean, the Navy had budgetary problems.
Oh, okay.
The Navy had budgetary problems. But the class of 1936 was the smallest class that had graduated, in maybe 50 years. I think it was 225 graduates in the class of 36. And when I entered the academy, we were organized into a regiment of 4 battalions, and there were only 1,800 there. Of course, today there are, I think, 4,200 in the brigade. But
now, I'm going to interrupt for a minute, but in some of the previous paper you gave me, you graduated in 1938, and some guy named Roosevelt was there to give you your diploma. Is that correct?
The president, yes,
Yeah.
gave me my diploma. He was there.
Okay.
Right.
Now, did you at that time have the opportunity, if you will, to select? You wanted to go deep sea Navy, submarines, Air Force, or Air Corps, whichever the Navy had.
No.
How did you come into that loop?
You had to do, as a newly commissioned ensign, you had to serve in a capital ship for 2 years, in which you were rotated in various departments. You were still considered in a training period.
Okay.
And after the 2 years, you could then apply for Pensacola for aircraft training or to New London for submarine training after the 2 years.
Okay. And then you opted apparently for the submarines. That started it.
Well, I didn't do it right after the 2-year period, not immediately. My mind was not clear on that subject. I was thinking of aviation because I used to fly the rear cockpit when the regular crews in the Lexington CV-2 had gotten there 4 hours in flight time. So even though I was in the engineering department and the gunnery department and then ran the exec's office, whenever I had a chance to fly, why, I took it. So I, after the takeoff, and we'd form up in formation, why the pilot would waggle a stick and give me controls.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of military formation flying. And then we would get ready to land on the carrier again, why he would take over. I was thinking of Pensacola, seriously.
What was the deciding factor?
The flight surgeon. There were only 6 flight surgeons in the Navy at that time, and the chap, Dr. Batchelus, in the Lexington, was examining me for a flight physical. And he looked at my eyes and he said, "You've got hay fever, haven't you?" I said, "Yes, I have. That's now known as allergies." He said, "Herb, if you want to take my advice and you have these allergies, this hay fever business, the first time you come in on some field and you're about 10 feet off the deck and you sneeze, that'll be the last sneeze that you make."
Yeah.
So he didn't think it was a good idea. And on sober thought, I agreed with him. So I gave up naval aviation. And sometime later, there was a call for submarine school volunteers. They were shortening the class from 6 months to 3 months to London. This was in the fall of 1940. And I decided that was it.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And I think that was one of the wiser moves I made in my life, because I lost 14 of my classmates, and we lost 3,617 men out of the 15,000 who actually made submarine war patrols. The percentage of losses was higher than any other military service, including 8th Air Force in England and the Marine Corps. Our percentage of losses was great. And those names are now inscribed on the submarine memorial in Groton, Connecticut, which I'm happy to say I was the fundraiser
Good.
and the master of ceremonies at the dedication, which might have been in 1989 or sometime like that. I don't remember.
But it's permanent.
Yes.
Good. Now that you're a submariner, what did your life do? How did you start living, if you will? You reported to New London, and then what happened? Where did you go and how did you get there?
Well, New London was a turning point in my life. I completed the course rather quickly, 3 months, and then there were vacancies posted in submarines all around the world. And we were given our choice according to class standing. There were about 40 of us in that class. And I had met a young lady in New London who appeared to be interested in the Navy. And there was a vacancy in one of the school submarines, the R-13, which was small, 180 feet long, and only had 30 men on it, and 2 officer bunks, and they decided to put a 3rd officer on it. So I volunteered for the R-13, and I got ordered to it in late March 1940. And I was the 3rd officer in R-13. No bunk.
Oh.
I was known as No Bunk Herb. And the 3rd officer in the Division of 4 were also known as No Bunk Charlie, etc. And that duty where we went out in Long Island Sound with students and made about 6 dives as they shifted stations didn't last very long. A month later, we were notified that we were going to Key West to serve as tame submarines for the Fleet Sonar School down there being established, and for training of sonar operators. And we would be relieved by the O-boats, which were in the back channel in Philadelphia. And that's where I first heard of Senator McCain's father, because he was given his first command as a lieutenant of one of those O-boats.
Now, O stands for what?
I don't know.
Operational or?
They were World War I submarines.
Oh, like O for old.
Oh, right. So we got ordered to sail for Key West, and I was the navigator, and I really felt very important as an ensign with the responsibility of using my sextant and finding my way down to Key West. And everything I'd heard about submarines was true. A young officer was given responsibility at an early age. And I was very careful because earlier that year, a cruise liner, I think named Manhattan or something, went aground just north of Jupiter Inlet, Florida, while making the last leg of the trip, 80-mile run from north of the Bahamas over to close the Florida coast and sail reasonably close to the coast to avoid the full strength of the Gulf current flowing north, of the Gulf Stream flowing north. So we found our way down to Key West. In the meanwhile, I was standing watch with the second officer, and the captain would come up and relieve me while I took my sights, morning and evening sights, in the morning sun line. And I didn't get very much sleep on that run. And when we finally got to Key West, making our 10 knots, I took about 7 or 8 days. I really went to sleep, caught up. But fast forward, December 7th came. After about 4 or 5 months in Key West. And I received a telegram that Thursday to get up to Portsmouth to put a brand new submarine, the Finback 230, in commission. And to be there by the following Monday, such delay to count as leave. By that time I was married and everything we owned went in the back of the car, and we drove like crazy to get up there to New London. And the war had started, and Finback went in commission January 31st, 1942. And later that spring, why Admiral Nimitz was screaming for submarines to get out in the Pacific. After a period of training, why we headed out for the Pacific in March, arrived there in April. There hadn't been any liberty for the men for several weeks. We zipped right through the Panama Canal, and we got in to Pearl. They had had a tip on the Battle of Midway, on Midway coming in, that the executive officer called us all up and said, as soon as we fuel and exchange our torpedoes and get new ones from the torpedo shop, we're leaving. This time the Japanese are coming, and they have a landing force with them. Had they had a landing force on December 7th, after what they did, they could have landed on Waikiki Beach standing up. So there was no liberty. We fueled, got new torpedoes, and took off for Midway, where we topped off fuel, and I had a chance to drive around the island with a Marine and see the island defenses while we were getting the fuel, and then we took off. And we're at the Battle of Midway. I think it was June 7th. There were 12 submarines involved in it. It was not a submarine battle. That was won by the dive bombers, who they finally launched. Admiral Spruance launched them, did get over the target and sighted the Japanese, and was waiting for the fighters for escort, so they could go in as an air group, which they practiced. But the fighters were not there. And so the dive bombers, and I knew most of those fellows, they did the job. they got their hits on the Japanese carriers, and they won the Battle of Midway. And Torpedo Squadron 8 came through that with one survivor. So I take my hats off to the Navy dive bombers who won the Battle of Midway. One submarine finished off one of the heavy ships, the Nautilus, one of the large ones that had 2 6-inch guns on it.
Now, were you one of the 12 that were in the Battle of Midway?
Yes. There is a plaque now at Midway, and every year I'm invited to go out there with the veterans of Midway. The Park Service runs the island now.
Oh, the National Park Service.
Right. But Midway became a refit for World War II submarines, and we used the old Pan American hotel called the Goonie Bird Hotel, Midway, for a refit. And we used to go in there for, we alternate going back to Pearl Harbor and Midway. Go in there
dry
for
docks
2 weeks.
or something like that for refitting?
Beg pardon?
Excuse me, but when you were doing the work at Midway, were they dry docks or?
No. There was a tender there with a repair crew.
Okay. Just tie up alongside.
That's right, alongside.
Okay.
And they did a repair, and you had, instead of going to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, which became a rest camp in Pearl Harbor, we'd have 2 weeks there, get some sunshine and good food, while a relief crew would take the submarine. Midway, we had what we called the Goonie Bird Hotel, a one-storied structure that Pan American had put there. And that's where we spent our time.
Now, what was your duty station there? And that, were you then an engineering officer, or were you the exec?
No, I was the 4th officer in the finback. I had torpedoes and gunnery and the 1st lieutenant, which was the upkeep of the hull. And I had the torpedoes.
You were busy.
Well, the torpedoes gave us a problem. You're probably aware of that.
Oh, yeah. We've heard a lot about some of them just plain didn't.
The exploder mechanisms didn't work. The original orders were to set the the torpedoes with their magnetic exploders to run 8 feet under the keel of the ship, estimate the keel depth, and then set them to run under the depth. Well, when we got wind of the torpedo problems, mainly from those submarines that had been out in the Philippines early on in the war, that ran into torpedo problems, we never followed the instructions. We always set them for contact. We'd make an estimate of the depth and say, well, that skipper would say, well, that guy is drawing 6 feet. We'll set the torpedoes to run for 8 feet. And so we set them all for contact, the hits we got.
How many hits?
Well,
how many? No, let me be real nosy. How many patrols were you on?
I was.
We got a whole bunch of.
I made 6, plus the Battle of Midway.
Wow. Any particular one that stands out? I know because you've got some stories to tell here. They all were, I understand.
They were all successful patrols.
Good.
If the patrol was successful, meaning you sunk at least one ship, the entire crew would get what was known as the submarine combat insignia, which was a small silver-like submarine pin that they could wear. I just wish that more combat decorations had been available to spread them around to the men a little bit more. The skippers would try to spread them around as much as he could. But there should have been more recognition if we could have done it to the crews.
Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that's the name of the game. Now, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but I'm just itching to read this little citation, if I may, with your permission. You want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, I prefer that you read
Okay,
it.
I'll try my bad. This is the back page, if you will, a cover, on the captain's book that he wrote when I read some of the early papers to answer some questions for his grandkids. As we said at the outset, it's written by the guy and the guys that were with him who made the history. You'll see across the top, there were 3 silver stars. I'll read the citation for one of them with my good eyes. The Secretary of the Navy, Washington. The President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Gold Star in lieu of the 3rd Silver Star Medal to Commander Herbert I Mandel, United States Navy, for service as set forth in the following citation. For gallantry and intrepidity as Assistant Approach Officer on the USS Croker during the 2nd War Patrol of that vessel in enemy Japanese-controlled waters from September 23 to November 10, 1949. Skilled and tireless in the performance of duty, sir.
1949, 1944.
I beg your pardon, these don't work. 1944, I don't want to take too much of our life away. Thank you. Skilled and tireless in the performance of duty, Commander, then Lieutenant Commander Mandel expertly supervised the activities of personnel under his command and, by his outstanding knowledge of attack problems, rendered invaluable assistance to his commanding officer in conducting aggressive attacks against the enemy to sink over 15,000 tons of shipping and to damage over 10,000 tons. His leadership, courage, and devotion to and the fulfillment of each perilous mission reflects the highest credit upon the commander, then Lieutenant Commander Mandel, and the United States Naval Service. Signed, for the President, James Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy. Wow. We can only say thank you and all that kind. Now, I'm jumping ahead because there's so many things that I wanted to try and have Herb, if you would me, talk about. Some of the various stages of your progression as you went from an ensign on up the ladder, the different chains of command, and some of the activities that you had to learn and knew and then take charge of. Is that a loaded question?
No, I think it's a very honest and direct question, because I was moving up and finally was given my own command of Permit, SS-178. They were all the same design, but Permit had been out in Manila when the war broke. And she made it through the war and had an excellent record, and very well-known skippers had been commander of. And when we got back to Pearl Harbor in December '44, I was summoned up to the headquarters and was told that permit was coming in from Brisbane the next day, and I was going to relieve in command. And I relieved a very fine gentleman who was 4 years senior to me, and I took command of the boat, operated around Pearl Harbor after a refit for a while, and then, much to my surprise, was ordered back for a major overhaul. The ship was due. And instead of the West Coast, Mare Island, which was full of kamikaze destroyers in early '45, I was sent back to the East Coast to Philadelphia Navy Yard for a major overhaul. So instead of sailing west where the targets were, I was sailing east and away from the action. After the overhaul, submarines were being retired at that time. Battleships were going up to the coast, and the final phase of the war was approaching. And I was ordered up and assigned to underwater sound lab for experimental duties. And much to everybody's surprise, why President Truman made the decision to drop the bomb. I gave thanks. I always felt lucky, but I was told that I would be given about 6 months back, and then it would be back to the Pacific again. And I felt that my luck might be running out with 14 of my Naval Academy classmates gone, friends, and many men that I had known gone. I was very thankful that the president stopped the war. I was then ordered to the staff in New London and was the chief staff officer in a group that mothballed 60 submarines and 4 submarine tenders. They were, the material, the engine material was covered with thin film rust preventative, and dehumidifier machines were put aboard these ships, reducing the humidity to 30% to preserve them.
Yeah.
Well, that gave me a period of about 3 years when I had some family life and my son was born. And I was fortunate enough in 1948 to receive orders to another submarine command, the Madrigal SS-480 in Key West, Florida. which was my last duty in submarines.
And then after that, where did you report, if you will, in civilian life? Because we talked about E-boat and that.
Well, a vacancy came up. The detail officer told me at the University of Pennsylvania, where there was a submarine officer up there who was senior to me, George Porter, who had a great record, was leaving. And so I took that position, was ordered up there as associate professor of naval science, exec of the Navy ROTC unit at Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. I had that assignment for 2 years when I was ordered for duty under instruction at the Armed Forces Staff College, which had students of all three services learn how to work with each other, plus a couple of Brits and one or two State Department people. And after that, why, I did receive orders to operations officer of an amphibious group that actually had a former submarine admiral in command of the group. And neither he nor I knew anything about amphibious.
Well qualified.
But we had to learn.
Oh, yeah.
And it was fascinating to dig in. We worked very closely with the Marines. Our flagship had a Marine general. I remember, and we did the first large-scale NATO operation in the Mediterranean. And the Marine general who was with us and his staff was a General Homer Litzenberg, whose son had been a student of mine at University of Pennsylvania. But as a colonel, he had been in command of the Marine regiment that was at the reservoir, the Chosin Reservoir in Korea at the very beginning, when, as the Marines put it, they advanced to the rear.
Amen.
So we were flown over to Naples, Italy, in a Navy plane to prepare the operation orders for this five-nation operation. And so I lived in NATO command, the Southern Command, it's still there now, is at Bagnoli, which is a suburb of Naples. And I had the opportunity there of flying over to Istanbul and work with the Turkish Navy, who were operating a number of former U.S. submarines, which I had mothballed back into London, and going over to the National Defense General Staff in Athens to brief them on the operation. And they had some of our former submarines on 5-year loan. And working with the Italian underwater swimmers with Gruppo Masserini, named after Commander Masserini, who was one of the frogmen who put the bombs under the British battleships in Alexandria Harbor very early in the war. So looking back on it, It was a great experience, and probably the one I remember the most when I was called up by the Admiral in Naples to take the operation order and hand deliver it to Admiral Lord Mountbatten, who had a large NATO command in Malta. And I was told to, when an appointment was made for me to brief the Admiral, to do it in 20 minutes. And we had a nice conversation. He was a very distinguished destroyer skipper in the Royal Navy, a real seaman. And while I was briefing him, he asked me if I'd ever been to Konya Bay, where we were doing our rehearsal. And he said, I've been to Konya. I stayed too long. When the Jerrys came, the island, why, I exhausted all my ammunition, so I was coming round the island. I was about 10 miles south of it, heading for Alexandria, when the Stukas found me and put me down. And he was sunk. And he said, Commander, the wind blows from the north. He was correct. We did our rehearsal landing, and the landing craft had the wind at the stern, and we brought them into the surf line and turned them around. During the rehearsal, we didn't want anybody being pitched into the water.
So he gave you a real good clue right off the bat then. Huh? Good.
Right.
Wonderful. Now, when you retired, we talked earlier again that you went as a, I guess, civilian working for E-boat, or how did that work, your post-service life?
Well, due to a family health problem, the Navy ceased being fun. And my wife and I had both enjoyed it, the travel and the people. And with a major health problem, it was time to go and take care of my wife. And I was employed by the Electric Boat Division of General Dynamics in Groton, Connecticut, which is a well-known shipyard. And I was assigned to the Research and Development Department, which had 700 people in it, including 225 of them with doctorates and master's degrees. I was taken into that department because of my recent fleet experience in command of submarines and destroyers. I had nothing to do with the nuclear propulsion, but my experience with torpedoes and with underwater sonar was of interest to them.
Mm-hmm. Good. And you retired officially when, 1988?
No, I retired from the Navy February 1st, 1961.
Okay. Now, it may sound like a silly question, but I'd like to ask it anyway. Based upon what you've seen and done and have lived, would you consider that your Navy experience has had a positive effect on your life or not a positive effect? What's the bottom line?
I am completely and thoroughly dedicated to the Navy and to the Naval Academy for my life.
Good.
It shaped my life. I think it's one of the great educational establishments in this country. And I was there in '08, June of '08, for a 70th reunion of my class, 38. There were 9 of us who were there. Now have 36 still alive. But at the reunion, there were 40 people there, including wives, widows, children, and grandchildren. And my son, Dr. Matt Mandel, was with me. I'm completely dedicated to the Navy.
It's easy to say because you just light up when you talk about it. I'm going to take a few minutes, if you will. There are a few pictures in here I'd like to share with you that show this fellow how he grew up a little bit. I've got them tabbed, I think, somewhere, somehow. 23 is the first one. Yes. I'm going to ask Bob if he can come in and get it. I'll try to hold this up so that you can get a good shot at it. And then I'll read the caption. Okay? That young fellow, as you're looking at it to your right, is the young man here today. Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, presenting Lieutenant Commander Mandel the Gold Star in lieu of the second Silver Star Medal at Pearl Harbor in 1944. Then we go back a few more pages. And this is the Niagara. I think I'll hold this, and if you want to explain the periscope shot.
That's an interesting shot. That was about 30 miles south of Nagasaki, fairly close to the beach, maybe 2 or 3 miles. The ship was zigzagging madly and had just zigged away from us. And as we fired our last torpedoes out of the stern tubes, 4 of them, they were electric torpedoes that ran at about 1,000 yards a minute compared to the faster steam torpedo that ran at about 1,600 yards a minute. And they were a good distance from us, so we were timing the run with a stopwatch when the cruiser zigged back to the right, and there was, and he caught one of the 4 torpedoes, wing torpedo, right under his stern. And we heard the boom, and shortly thereafter, there were 2 more booms, which we concluded were probably the ammunition in his gun turrets back there near the mainmast. At that time, the skipper, Jack Lee, turned to me and said, "Herb, take a look." And up scope, and I took a quick look, and I saw men jumping over the side and the stern going down. And I yelled for the quartermaster to get the camera, Dupre, and he grabbed the camera and took the pictures.
Beautiful.
And we gave a copy of that picture to each member of the crew.
Good souvenir. Wonderful.
Right.
Now, I got 1 or 2 more. You want to talk about that one?
Yes. I had received orders when I was in Norfolk, commanding the destroyer Douglas H. Fox, when I was selected for captain. And my orders read to assume command of Destroyer Division 252. And I knew from the numbers that it was in the Pacific. And I found out that it was home ported in Pearl Harbor. And I found out the operating schedule, they were going to be out in Asia in the 7th Fleet. So the picture is of me taking command of the division in Yokosuka at the naval base
I
in
just
Japan.
got a flag from my signalman that we've run the whole hour. All I can do again is say thank you, sir, and we appreciate what you've done. And we'll see some more of you, I hope. Okay?
Well,
thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, folks. This is one more story. Hope it was of interest to you, but more important, if you have something to say or share, come and see us. Thank you, and stay well.